Dana, thank you so much for making the time. Almost 10 years ago, we were just talking about it. I remember, right? So with the MIT MOOC team, we invaded your office at the Urban Studies Department, MIT DUSP, at the Community Innovators Lab, CoLab, and we had a wonderful conversation that actually led to a series of clips, 3 clips that are among the most watched in the entire ULab setup. So that's why most of us will have watched those other clips already at this point. And now, 9 years on, we have the opportunity to touch base again. So thank you for making the time, and also if you and we were just starting that conversation. If you look back, right? So 2014, when we taped this initial material, what has changed since? Maybe start with you personally, because you used to work next door, no longer. So what happened?
So I left MIT in 2020 and went to Tufts University. I'm the dean of the Tisch College of Civic Life, and I've been there now, incredibly, it's already 2 years.
Congratulations! That's such a fantastic opportunity. And what is your role? So why did they hire you for doing what?
So Tisch is the only higher education institution in the country that focuses on democracy and what are the prospects for it? What are the risks? And we work doing research particularly on youth engagement. We work with students. We say building a generation of students who are prepared to be leaders in transforming democracy to make it more robust and inclusive, particularly in the changing multiracial societies that are emerging. And then we work with communities, helping kind of open up the doors of the university to bring the knowledge of the university and the knowledge of community together to create solutions to societal problems.
So that's how your personal role has evolved. When you look back, into the outer world, our world now is pretty much different. What we saw a decade ago. So what is it you're noticing?
So I think the obvious that everybody would say and that is inescapable is how we have changed since the pandemic. And I say that so much of what came through in the pandemic, and I mean Black Lives Matter protests and conversations about essential workers and the visibility of social crisis was a visibilizing, not an emergence. All of these things have been there for a long time, and many of us, particularly people working on social justice issues, were aware. But I think the magnitude and the shift in awareness has been extraordinary. And what I see is 2 things. I see across all of it a lot of pain and trauma, and it is both the rise of white nationalism, in my view, is a trauma response, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that. This is
a trauma response to what exactly?
I think that white people are suffering, and that I spoke before about the identity of whiteness in this country, and how the country is founded on some very extractive and violent ideas about identity. And that extraction and violence also affects white people. And it is, it's inescapable when a country is founded on really deep forms of cruelty, as many countries are. I'm just most familiar with mine. That seeks into the soul of everybody. and affects social relations and market relations. It affects everything, and the injury is not confined to the groups that are victimized. It is, the suffering tends to be deeper there, and so I don't want to step lightly over that. It tends to be deeper there, but there is suffering across the board, and I think what has emerged is across the board, whether it is the rise of white nationalism or the response in justice movements, it is a calling out of the pain that wants to be addressed and wants to be remedied. And to me, that is, for me, I find this period as daunting and frightening as it can be, the polarization, the anger. I find it very hopeful because it is, the crack is opening. And I think it's the crack that lets the sunlight through, right? It's the only thing we have is to have more awareness so that we can act on it. So I started by saying that the rise of white nationalism is a trauma response. And I think somewhere in my heart, I try to hold some empathy for that, even as it frightens me and distresses me and leads me to despair. And then I am also deeply moved by all of the different ways in which the humanity rose up to be recognized in Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, the biggest protests in the history of the country, super multi-racial, global. And, you can't not be moved by that. Nonviolent. You can't not be moved by that. And all that together, how I read that is, it is a rising up of humanity saying, see us, and we see ourselves, and we are going to change. And that's what gives me hope.
I thought the murder of George Floyd, and capturing that on video, so that was something that created certainly on a country, but it was also on a planetary scale, a shared experience of seeing and attending to a situation that existed before, but wasn't really visible in this way. And somehow this moment catalyzed. I almost feel that was part of it. That's not the only enabling condition, but I felt that was part of what catalyzed an opening and an attention to a dimension that was in our blind spot. When I say our, so that's like in many people's blind spot, including myself certainly before. So that's I don't know how you think about what from what happened, what we experienced in the Berlin experience, what of that may be applicable or not today, and how can we, just as we saw with the murdering of George Floyd, how is that, and now which conditions can what's happening in many communities every day become a catalyst for a shift in awareness and a shift in collective behavior?
In 2020, we were in the middle of COVID. And there were a whole different set of muscles and forms of awareness that were we were in the grips of, in a way. Yeah, so we were, a sense of collective that I had never experienced before, because you were so attuned to who was sick, meaning if there were people around you who were sick, what it meant that this thing was just sweeping through the country. All of a sudden, this idea that actually in real life, our destinies are connected. and that this idea of essential workers, which I think was in many ways, cynical and exploited, but made visible a reality of our society, both of those things coexisting. And so there were all kinds of sensitivities and awareness that we were all grappling with that we had never had to address before, had never been visible to us. And there was this hunger for connection. So everybody talked about, first of all, you were hunkered down, and then they were, and so you were making, for me anyway, I was, my friends and I were on weekly phone calls just because we wanted to make sure nobody was sick and everybody was okay, and we were managing this moment and figuring out how to food shop and finding out where to get masks. And there was a lot of that going around, all of this sort of unexpected, incidental, spontaneous awareness of the whole, that just because of the crisis. And I think that is the nature of crisis, is that it makes you attuned to things that you would never otherwise be attuned to. And so all of that, and then I remember, and I think I've talked about this in other presencing settings. So for me, my girlfriends and I had our weekly call, and we kept talking about all the people we knew who had died or who were dying. And before any data came out about who was dying, we were saying, is this just us, or is there something about Black people are dying more? Brown people are dying more. What's going on? And so I think we weren't the only ones with that. That was so, it was kind of breathtaking. And there was so much grief. I think there was grief across the whole society. And in communities of color, the grief was because the conditions were so much more extreme. It was just so much grief. And I remember talking to a friend who said, something is going to happen. This was before George Floyd. We can't, there is too much pain. We cannot keep it contained. And then George Floyd happened. And so I do, somebody once said, you just don't want a good crisis to go to waste. And I do think that crises open these cracks and make it possible to see a connectedness and an urgency, and with this kind of raw, exposed way, humanity in a different way. And I think that is what emerged in the George Floyd moment. And so, I do yoga. And my yoga teacher, we were all online, and for weeks and weeks and weeks after the George Floyd thing, he was talking about everybody has to watch the 8 minutes. Everybody has to, and he's a white guy, and almost everybody in the class was white. So he was not, he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the whole group, and he kept on saying, this is an injury to our collective body, and yoga is so much about breath. And if you don't witness what happens when somebody's breath is taken and understand that that is your breath being taken, this is yoga. This is not political analysis. This is not, this is somebody moved by this, the intensity of the moment, to speak to a truth that would never come up in the context of that kind of a practice. And I think that was emblematic of the moment. And honestly, I kept saying, he has to stop, because he is going to scare these white people out of this class. They're not going to come back talking about racial violence when they're there to stretch their hips, And he said, my friends keep telling me to stop talking about it. I cannot stop talking about it. Everybody has to witness this. And there was something about that moment, and that will not be the last moment. And that's what's coming, is that we are in, moments of escalating crises, and we will be witnessing all kinds of human suffering, and always with human suffering there is human triumph, and we'll see all of it. And I believe that we are and you said this earlier, it's like, what kind of intelligence do you need to survive and step into the future in a moment like this? And I think it is this intelligence of the heart.